might be nice to begin with a short but very simple ritual. And the ritual is called Come Forwards a Little Bit. And as you can see, the best rituals are completely practical. They kind of serve a purpose. And the purpose of this ritual is to bring us a little bit closer together, but also to make a little bit of room at the back for anyone who might come late. Because as we know, time is elastic in Buddhafield. So people will come late. Hey. Okay, that's great. Quite often at home, if I'm doing a little class or something, I start with another ritual, but we won't do this time, called the mobile ritual. And it asks everyone to take their mobile out of their pocket and hold it up. Everyone holds up their mobiles. Then they look at their mobiles, and if it's on, they turn it off. Because there's nothing worse than meditating and the mobile goes off. But here, for me anyway, happily, there is zero signal. So there's no need to do that ritual. Anyway, as you can see, life is full of rituals, and Buddhafield is full of rituals. But as far as I know, we haven't ever kind of talked about them before. I might be wrong, but this is what we kind of came to realise when we were planning the Dharma Parlour. We hadn't really talked about rituals in Buddhism. So I hope this might be the start of a series, because I certainly don't feel I have answers. I've just got a few thoughts or reflections, or even stories to tell. Maybe that's the best thing to do, is tell stories. But others might have very different stories and very different reflections. Anyway, I've been dwelling on it for a while, as you do if you're giving a talk. And the first thing that came to my mind, and it kept coming to my mind, is that ritual, in general, is not everyone's cup of tea. So I don't know if that's true for you, but I think it is true. And that's a shame, because actually, most cups of tea are rituals. Pretty much all cups of tea are rituals. But then cups of tea is not my ritual. I'm not a tea person. I never drink tea. So rituals and cups of tea are, a personal taste. But I think if you are not into rituals, I can't speak for tea, you're kind of missing something. And as you'll see, they're all around Buddhafield. And I think there's various things that might get in the way, and various things that might help just kind of understand what rituals are about. And if this talk helps, I'll be really pleased. So there's various kind of negative perceptions people might have of rituals. The first one is they're not rational, they don't make sense. But the fact is, they are not rational and they don't make sense. So that's a fact. The next one is they're kind of formulaic, and you have to do them again and again and again and go through the motions and do what you're told, and they're kind of prescriptive. And potentially that is true. They are repetitive, and you do them again and again, and they have got a form, and you sort of do what you're told. But again, hopefully, that doesn't have to get in the way. And anyway, not all rituals are like that anyway. And maybe another negative perception is they're just meaningless. I mean, who cares? They're meaningless. And that one, I think, really is a mistake. Rituals are not meaningless. Rituals should be really meaningful. So I think one thing that may get in the way of rituals is you don't understand what the point is. And that's something that should be quite easy to correct just by a bit of explaining in advance what the ritual is about. So there's quite a few things which Buddhist rituals definitely are not. So again, another thing that might get in the way is we bring with us previous bad experiences of rituals from some other tradition. So Buddhism has rituals, but so does practically every single religion under the sun. And every society under the sun has its rituals. So we will have come from some kind of background or another, and we might have had bad experiences of rituals. So there's quite a few things Buddhist rituals are not, or hopefully are not. So to start with, they are not a performance. They are not a spectator sport. You don't kind of stand there or sit there and be entertained and clap at the end. They're not a spectator sport. And towards the end, I'll try and talk a bit about how to create a ritual. And it's very difficult, really, to create a ritual which really fully involves people. And the bigger the ritual, the more easier it is to slide into creating a performance. You have all your participants and your master ceremonies and all that, but then the audience is just left standing there. But it's not meant to be a spectator sport. I'll tell you one little story actually, because I think any ritual where you are on the outside and you don't really know what's going on tends to look pretty strange. Buddhist rituals are no exception. So one little story, as I was on a pilgrimage in India, going around the Buddhist places, and we just climbed this hill to these caves. And we looked down, there was a kind of shoulder to the hill, and we suddenly saw all these Tibetan monks lined up on this shoulder in full Tibetan monk regalia, including fantastic hats, yellow hats. And they were just about to do something, and what they did is they had a huge red triangle, a massive upside down red triangle, which they put up in front of them. And with great ceremony, as we were watching, they set fire to it. The whole thing was primed in petrol, I suppose, and it shot up in flames. And it burned to a cinder. And we watched it, not having a clue what was going on. Not a clue. And we went to our cave, and we came down past the little monastery, and all the monks were sitting there, drinking tea, obviously really, really pleased with themselves. They were really pleased with their day's ritual of burning this upside-down red triangle. But what it was about, I have no idea. No idea at all. It looked great, but it was also kind of meaningless. So anyway, it's not a spectator sport or a performance, really. Another thing Buddhist rituals are not, it's not any kind of propitiation of the deity. You're not kind of trying to make it all right with God in any sense. Mostly because, for Buddhism, there is no God. So you're just not in that world. There is no God to propitiate. There is no sacrifice. Who would you sacrifice to? There is no sacrifice. There's no sense of atoning for your sins, because it's not the same concept as sin in Buddhism. So you don't get rituals, of confession and forgiveness of sins. Also, they're not superstitious. I'll try and talk about that a bit more later. So the point is, maybe, ideally, Buddhist rituals are just in a different world, a different atmosphere to the world of God, the world of sin, the world of judgment, the world of forgiveness, and the world of superstition. So, I don't know what backgrounds people have come from, but if that is your background, obviously it's difficult to let go of sometimes, but all I can say is try to start afresh. Try and start afresh. So Buddhist rituals, they come in all shapes and sizes. That's the first thing to say. All shapes and sizes. And on Buddhafield, they come in all shapes and sizes. So I'd like to offer a little bit of a framework, just to kind of place different types of rituals. So the first framework is some rituals are traditional. They've been done for many, many years, over and over again, by a community in a certain way. They're traditional. And some rituals are made up on the spot. They're improvised. I don't think one's better or worse than the other. They're just different shapes of flavours of ritual, traditional and improvised. So if you've been around us for a while, you might have done the sevenfold puja. The sevenfold puja is definitely a traditional ritual that we do. We do it more or less the same way, more or less every time. And some people love it and some people hate it, but it's definitely one of our traditional rituals. An improvised one is like last night. We did the opening ceremony. As far as I know, that particular opening ceremony has never been done before. Probably never will be. Great, it's an improvised ritual. Another distinction is some rituals are collective for a whole community to do something together, and some are personal. So just me, my little private ritual, or you. So again, last night was a collective ritual, collective and improvised. A personal ritual will be something quite private to you. You might have a kind of getting up in the morning and doing something kind of ritual. I couldn't think of any for me, so I can't give you an example, I'm afraid. But definitely, people do all sorts of funny little rituals.
Getting dressed. Brushing your teeth.
Well, you do all those things. You do get dressed, and you do brush your teeth, and you do drink coffee. I'm not sure they're rituals. I mean, in a minute I'll talk about what is a ritual. I mean, not everything you do is a ritual. I think a ritual is a particular action. So maybe when we come on to the type of action, we'll find examples of personal rituals. Anyway, they are personal or collective. Another bit of the framework, maybe a bit more contentious, is that some rituals, when I was reading about it, they were called rational and irrational rituals, but I'm not sure that's the best framework. I would call it deluded and undeluded rituals. That's a bit more pokey. Some rituals are deluded, let's say, and some rituals are not deluded. So I was thinking a deluded ritual. When I was coming here, I was looking at the weather forecast. I imagine most of us were, and the weather forecast wasn't fantastic. So I was visualising I might give a talk and it might be raining. So a little kind of rain ritual, I'm sure you've done it as a kid, is you say, rain, rain, go away. Little Johnny wants to play. Is that right? Anyway, that's a kind of personal, traditional, anti-rain ritual. But I would call that deluded, because it's very unlikely to have any effect on the rain. It might make you feel better, that's great, but if you want to get rid of the rain, saying rain, rain, go away won't help. But then if you're doing the Metta Bhavana, our loving kindness meditation, you might say, may I be well, may I be happy. For me, that could work. That's not a deluded ritual. And the distinction here is that Buddhism talks about conditionality. Everything arises and passes away in dependence on conditions. Everything has a cause. Everything that happens has an effect. And that kind of linking of cause and effect is not random. So the rain arises from causes, all kinds of causes. But the causes do not include me saying little verses down on planet Earth. It's just not part of that linkage of cause and effect. So a ritual has to fit into the way things actually are, so it can sensibly have an effect. So if I say, may I be well, may I be happy, may I be free from suffering, that can really have an effect on my mind, because there's a very clear relationship between, what I say and what I think and what I become. So that's in harmony with conditionality, cause and effect. But a lot of rituals in the world, I would say, are not really in harmony with that kind of reality. To give you an example, I think the more I head into examples, the more you can head into contentious areas. But hopefully there'll be time for questions and discussion and stuff afterwards. But another example is, not so long ago, I was in India, and I was in Varanasi. I imagine some of you have been there. And Varanasi has the Ganges, fantastic big river. And it's got a non-stop procession of people bathing in the Ganges. And they bathe to remove their sins. If you bathe in the Ganges, you are purified. All your sins are washed away by Mother Ganges. And I would say, with all due respect, that is deluded. It's just not going to work. It will not wash away your sins. You could kind of construct a way it might work where you so wholeheartedly want to be purified that you so sincerely want to go beyond how you were that you do. You really do. Great. So you are purified. But it's not connected with you getting in the Ganges. The Ganges has the effect of making you dirty. It's the most grubby river you've ever seen in your life. So I would offer that as an example of a deluded ritual, where getting in this water does not wash away your sins. Anyway, so a bit of a framework is traditional rituals, improvised rituals, personal rituals, collective rituals, and then what you might call deluded and undeluded rituals. But that leaves a lot of room for the irrational. I want to emphasise that. I think a ritual quite specifically touches areas below our conscious mind. And if it doesn't touch those areas, it probably won't go very deep. And those areas are irrational. So let's not call it rational, irrational. Let's call it something else. So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the purpose of ritual in Buddhism, And then just start giving more and more examples, more and more little stories, because each one might pull out something about a good ritual. So the purpose of ritual, as far as I could see, were two main purposes. One was what you might call a rite of passage. Obviously not unique to Buddhism. A rite of passage is just stopping, in a way. Stopping and making sure you really mark with due ceremony and seriousness an important event. And we all know life is busy, life goes on, things happen, blah blah blah. And unless you have this rite of passage, you might just never properly notice things as they happen. So the opening ceremony was a good example. We've all been here working away, putting things up and taking them down and painting them. And we could almost not notice the festival had started and, you know, people with tickets had come. So the opening ceremony for people working here is a good kind of reminder. Okay, let's stop. Something is about to happen. 2,000 people are about to arrive, you know, to join us. And it's very important to mark that kind of thing. Rites of passage include births, marriages, handfastings, even deaths. I mean, death tends to be so in your face, you can't avoid it. But a thing like, you know, births and marriages, you could easily just not quite notice. Two people have got together, major thing. It's just kind of an opportunity to stop and mark. This has happened. Or your child is growing up. Children, you know, they're always growing up, aren't they? But a little kind of rite of passage just helps you really notice things as they happen. So the purpose of that is to stop. It almost doesn't matter what you do. You just stop and you pay attention and you come together and you mark this thing. And because you do that, you're more aware of it. So rituals help us be more aware, more present in the moment, and also more likely to remember this has happened. And a collective ritual will almost by definition help bind the community together. So rite of passage, say it's a child growing up, that child will be part of a community, even if it's just a family, part of the family. So the whole family kind of comes together to notice this thing happening. So that's one type of ritual, very important, but in a way fairly simple. You know, marking things which are happening, which you could easily not notice. And I don't think it matters too much what you do. You just have to stop and realise. So another purpose of ritual, I think more significant as far as ritual goes, is kind of helping us set our intentions and then strengthen our intentions. So that's more for the future. Where are we going? What do we want to do? And that's going to kind of obviously challenge you to stop and think, where are we going? What do we want to do? But then sort of summon up all those resources you need to get there. And a good ritual will really help clarify your intention and kind of focus it on something, but then engage you fully, not just the head, all the different layers all the way down. It'll kind of engage you fully. And unless those areas are engaged, you're very unlikely, we're all very unlikely, to really make much progress. So one definition of ritual, or one major purpose of ritual, is that we've all got intellectual understandings. We all kind of know ever so much. We've all read a million books. We all understand, you know, voidness and emptiness and interconnectedness and compassion and blah, blah, blah. But ritual can help us find emotional equivalents for our intellectual understandings. Intellectual understanding is easy. Emotional equivalent for that, real emotional connection, is quite hard, very difficult. Partly because you come up against so much resistance. Part of you wants to be compassionate and wise and all that. Part of you does not. Just wants to kind of carry on as you are, however that might be. So you need to kind of find a way, using ritual, to kind of engage more of you. So then a good ritual will do that. I'll talk about that more in a bit. So it should be transformative, yes. It helps you set your intention, strengthen your intention, and then you can kind of head forwards to transform yourself. So the third thing I've got for a purpose of ritual is very linked, is that it invokes deeper forces. You've got your intentions. It's not going to be an easy journey. If it's worth doing, it won't be easy. So you need to invoke deeper forces to help you get there. It can't just be an idea. Let's be enlightened. Let's go to India. Let's do whatever. You need to kind of really summon up everything you can to help you. And I think I was talking to one friend about it, and he had the view that in the end, in this area, there's really only one Buddhist ritual, which would be invoking and strengthening the bodhicitta. So I don't know if you've heard of the bodhicitta. It's a kind of technical term. It translates as the will to enlightenment. The will to enlightenment. So it's kind of our wholehearted, fully engaged desire to be enlightened for the sake of all beings. That includes wisdom, it includes compassion, it includes fearlessness, it includes action, it includes helping others in the same way. So from a certain point of view, that's what Buddhists are aiming at. That's what the Buddha aimed at, that's what we're aiming at, is the development of bodhicitta, which takes you forward to enlightenment. But I think that may be true, but in practice we're going to have all sorts of goals along the way, which are just as important because they are our immediate goals. So a ritual here starts off with clarifying our goal. What is it we are trying to achieve? And then devising some sort of ceremony, some sort of ritual, some sort of action to help us get there. So I'll give you a few little examples. One is we value friendship very strongly. So if you're going to kind of embark on this mythic spiritual journey, you need friends. We all need friends. And particularly you need spiritual friends who'll just really support you as you go. So, you know, people have friends in general, but we have a kind of ceremony of friendship. And the kind of Buddhist word for spiritual friend is literally Kalyana Mitra, which just means beautiful friend, but spiritual friend. So if you have a particular connection with one or two people, you can have this ceremony of a ritual of friendship. It's called a Kalyana Mitra ceremony. And there'd be you and your two friends, and then somebody conducting the ceremony. And the way it works is you just, in a way, you sit there, but there's this red thread that's part of the ceremony, and at a certain point you thread it from the Buddha on the shrine. You probably tie it around the Buddha's wrist on the shrine, and you'd loop it round your wrist and your friend and your other friend and the celebrant, and all the way back to the Buddha, and there's this red thread, symbolising obviously a kind of flow of spiritual friendship from the Buddha all the way round and back. And then you'd cut it and you'd wrap it around your wrist and tie it there with a good tight knot, and that's just your memory of friendship. And the ceremony is more complicated, but that's the bit I wanted to draw out, because it's an action, and it's something to help you remember for hopefully for weeks and months afterwards. You can see this red thread, and you just remember, there's my connection with these people and ultimately the Buddha. And what you're doing, I think, is making a little model, almost in miniature. There's enlightenment, and there's my teacher, and there's me and my friends. It's a kind of little model in the shrine room in miniature of your actual relationships in the world in real life. And I think many rituals are models in this way. Miniature model, something happens, but it kind of has an effect out in the world. I'll give you another example, is we do retreats in all shapes and sizes. You've probably been on one, I don't know. But if you get ordained into the Triratna Buddhist order, there's likely to be a long retreat. If you're free to go in it, we'll do a 3-month or a 4-month long retreat. And that's quite a big thing to do. You've got to kind of save up the money and book the time and get out to Spain and all that. And it's not compulsory in any way, but it's very common when you get there to shave your head. Just to take a razor and just shave all your hair off. And it's a kind of ritual, more personal, but just symbolically leaving everything behind. You're just leaving it all behind, including your hair. And ideally, you'll just be free. You'll be free to become a completely different person over the course of 3 or 4 month long retreat. It's clearly not the thing itself. You know, you have to become different, and shaving your hair off won't make you different. But it's quite a strong symbolic act. I've only done it once in my whole life, on my ordination retreat, is shave off all my hair. And it was quite a strong thing to do. You feel completely different. So I think ritual has power, even if it's just, you know, a sort of silly little action in a way. It still has power. So red thread has power. I've had several in my life and they've all fallen off. But they do have power. Shaving your hair off has power. And what you're doing there is you're kind of modelling partly this intention to be free, and partly you're modelling what the Buddha did. You see many paintings of him. He's usually just got off a horse, because he's ridden through the night away from the palace, away from the kind of kingdom. He's got off his horse, he's just about to go off into the jungle on his own, but before he does it, he's cutting off his hair. And he's got a lovely long ponytail, a bit like me, and he's chopping it off with a sword in the pictures. I think there's one in the meditation area, actually. So that's another ceremony. Very simple, but quite powerful. Another one I'll tell you, then a bit more theory, is that I remember on the very early Buddhafield festivals, they were much, much smaller, but very kind of intimate, a real kind of family gathering. But, just like any festival, there came an end. So quite important to have a closing ceremony and just help people mark this is ending, you know, just about now. You know, you've got to kind of realise that. And the ones we had almost happened spontaneously, I think. We just all gather in the big kind of village green area and hold hands in a giant circle. There's only like 300 people, so easy enough to hold hands in a big circle. And we simply held hands and looked at each other, and love and peace and vibes flowed. But then we kind of stepped back and stepped back and stepped back, and the circle got bigger until it reached a point you couldn't hold hands anymore because the circle was too big and you were stretched out, you know, with your neighbour. And then you stepped back a bit more and you had to let go. And the circle dissolved into 300 different people who had let go. It's a very simple little ceremony. Quite moving, actually. So I think another thing a ritual is it's a container for emotion, a container for strong emotion. And then what happened is everyone kind of rushed into the centre, into a great big huddle, crash in the centre, and then back again into a kind of circle and had to let go, back into the centre, out in a big circle. And then the final thing was to kind of accept you couldn't hold hands anymore and just turn round, face the world and kind of bow to the world. You know, you're about to re-enter the world. So again, a model. You know, we were literally about to jump into cars and drive hundreds of miles. But the model was a little circle that just got bigger and bigger, and we were separated in that way. So a ritual, it is a kind of model. It's modelling something that you want to really happen in the real world. Okay. So I want to go on a bit now and just talk about this kind of question of the depths, how you might summon up, or what it might mean to summon up deeper energies to be part of your ritual. The first thing I want to mention is just the need for a ritual space. I think a good ritual needs a space in which it happens. And unless you create your ritual space, it just will never quite work. You'll be doing these funny little things you don't quite understand, and they won't have the kind of right meaning, and it could all go a bit kind of bit wrong. So ritual space, and then you enter the ritual space, and then the ritual begins, and you are sort of in a different world. for the duration. I had a very good example of this recently, actually. I live in Glastonbury, not far away, and it's Beltane. And every Beltane, the Druids come en masse to Glastonbury, and they do a ceremony on top of Glastonbury Tor. And this was the first time I managed to go. And maybe 300 Druids, again just about big enough to stand in a big circle, all facing inwards. And they had a very specific ritual for creating this magical ritual space. Literally a lady with a wand just went around the whole circle, kind of tapping everybody, like, you are now enchanted, you are now enchanted, you are now enchanted. And saying, you know, everyday reality is dissolved, it has gone. And we really were in this magical space on top of this magical hill, Glastonbury Tor. And then they did their thing. Their thing was to enact a whole kind of cosmic union of heaven and earth and male and female to kind of come together. And then, equally important, is they dissolved it. The same lady with the same wand went round in the opposite direction, tapping everybody, you know, time to wake up. More or less saying that. So, to have a ritual of any kind of power, you need a ritual space and a clear kind of boundary to that. So yes, we do a lot of rituals, aiming to summon up these deeper, stronger, kind of more irrational forces, and they're symbolised in some way or another. So for us, they tend to be symbolised by a Buddha figure, and there are many, many, many Buddha figures. Sometimes it's the Buddha, you know, Shakyamuni Buddha. Sometimes they are coloured, green, red, yellow, blue. Sometimes they're male, sometimes they're female, sometimes they are multi-armed. The one above our heads has 1,000 arms. It's the most extraordinary figure. It's called the 1,000-armed, the 11-headed, 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara. But they are, for Buddhists, they are symbols of enlightenment, or enlightenment energy of one sort or another. And I think at this point, ritual kind of gets harder to talk about because it's more and more easy to be misled by language. So if you talk about, let's call on the Buddhas, as some people do, it's a bit like, let's call on the neighbours. You know, you sort of go next door and you knock on the door and the person comes out. But calling on the Buddhas is not like that, because they don't exist, you know, next door in quite the same way as the neighbours do. And yet some people feel, you know, all you do is contact the Buddha within, and they wouldn't have Buddhas without at all. But I think the best way to understand it is Buddhas or Buddha figures don't quite exist inside us and don't quite exist outside us. They kind of exist in a realm you can't categorise as inside or outside, which makes it hard to talk about because language tends to put it in one box or another. If you see them as entirely outside, you're more or less in the world of gods. And you're back into the world of sacrifice and atonement and propitiation and calling on gods to bless you, which is, I would call, deluded ritual, because it just won't work that way. But if you see them as not really existing at all and just vaguely, you know, inside you, I think you miss something very important. So the Buddha energy, it's kind of inside us and not inside us. And I think that makes sense because the whole point is we seek to become enlightened, pretty much like the Buddha, equally full of wisdom, equally full of compassion, equally full of the capacity to act, equally full of fearlessness. And yeah, to become like the Buddha. And I think if you see Buddhas as gods, you're in a different category because you can never become like a god. That's a major kind of failing if you see yourself becoming like a god. It's like the ultimate pride, the ultimate sin almost. So all the Buddha figures you might call on are energies which are not just in us, not just outside us, but somewhere in between the two. A bit more like just potential in the universe. And I think one way the ancient Indians visualized this was like fire. So fire, when it's not physically in front of you, you can ask, where is fire? And for them, fire was a potential that could spring up anywhere. Anywhere you had the right combination of wood and matches, fire could spring up. So it was potentially here, potentially here, potentially here. All you needed was the right conditions to bring it into being. And I think Buddhism would say the same about enlightenment energy. You know, these figures, or this energy, could spring up anywhere when the conditions are right. So ritual is about creating the right conditions for energy like that to spring up. Sort of out of nothing, like fire, sort of comes out of nothing, but actually it's perfectly, you know, scientific. You just need the right conditions. So there's not a kind of Mount Olympus where all the Buddhas are kind of sitting, despite some Buddhist art. And there's not a kind of, you know, it's not just a psychological thing where it's all inside us. It's more like figure out the right conditions and the Buddhas or the energy will appear. Then all the symbolism of all these Buddhas is really just to kind of engage our imaginations. And it's a very interesting process watching Buddhism shift from one culture to another. So practically all the images you will see come from the Tibetan, Nepalese, Indian, Tibetan Buddhist tradition. And they're all beautiful, but they are quite specific to that particular culture and their particular imagination. And there's no special reason they should appeal to us. So I think one reason I love being a Buddhist in the West at this time is I feel part of a whole journey with many others of reimagining these energies. You know, what might it look like to be compassionate? What might it look like to be fearless? There's plenty of traditional Buddha images, but we need new ones to speak to us. So all these are beautiful, but not necessarily what we want. And I think we should give ourselves kind of free rein just to reimagine different images. If you look a bit broader in the Buddhist world, the Chinese Buddhist art is completely different. Completely different. Very kind of Chinese. The Japanese Buddhist art is different again. It's Japanese. The Thai Buddhist art, etc., is different. The Thais go for Buddhas with extraordinarily pointy heads. I have no idea why. It just obviously works for them. What we might come up with, I really don't know. This painting is particularly lovely because it's painted by a woman who's here actually, Kat. And it's kind of a little bit halfway between the two. It's very faithful to Tibetan imagery, but there's all the Buddhafield tents in the foreground. So it's just kind of shifting a bit. Anyway, Buddhist ritual aims to contact these kinds of energies, which are not just us, not just out there somewhere, up on some Mount Olympus, and bring them into being with the right conditions. And the right conditions are those conditions that just engage us really fully. So a good ritual will be kind of beautiful, and the kind of beauty that draws you in, makes you want to just be there. And it'll be the kind of beauty that speaks to you on many different levels. It's kind of multi-sensory. So there'll be words and music, you know, audio. There'll be incense, there'll be smells, there'll be images, there'll be things to physically do. And then you're just fully in this world, a kind of mythical world. And the criteria for success is it works. It just fully engages you. And at that point, we come back to kind of improvised versus collective rituals. Because, improvised versus traditional rituals. So a traditional ritual is something you do again and then again and then again. And for a community that has real power, it's kind of what we do this. But it's quite hard to do it again and again with real engagement and freshness. So a lot of people kind of say, you know, I'm bored by Buddhist ritual because I've done it a million times. But I think it's like meditation. I've done the mindfulness of breathing and the loving-kindness meditation for 30 years, more or less. And it is possible to come fresh to meditation every single time. It's more what I do, how I do it, than the thing itself. So it's possible to come fresh to ritual, but you just have to make that special effort, because you're not going to be entertained. It's not a spectator sport. But if you come to it in the right way, it is fresh. So anyway, it's fully engaging. Sorry, I've lost my place slightly. It's fully engaging by all your different senses. So you can fully kind of be in this mythical world, invoking these mythical energies, which are mythical but not unreal. And then sort of, all I can say is it rubs off. It rubs off. It's like there's a model here of reality, and then because it's working down here, you're fully engaged in this mythical world, you kind of are different. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is that ritual is like play. So it's possible to get really serious about ritual, almost like an anxious theatre director, but that's not the best state of mind. It's much healthier to see it as a child playing. And sometimes for children, play is very serious. It's dead serious. They really are building a space rocket, and it really is going to the moon, or whatever. And that's the spirit in which to do a ritual. You really are building this mythical vehicle and really are going to the bodhicitta. And yet, you know, it's play. And if somebody comes along and kicks it when you're just about to take off, you know, you kind of fix it and on you go again. So, you know, when you're doing a ritual, anything can happen, and you just have to improvise and carry on. Yeah. And I think for some of us, that mood of play is not easy to enter, because we're all a bit grown up. So I think I personally prefer improvised rituals than traditional ones, just because by definition you're making it up and you're kind of playing and you're taking what is to hand and you're making use of it, and you don't quite know what you're doing. So I'll tell you a couple of improvised rituals I was part of recently that just seemed to work really well. So one was, it was in Birmingham. It was a kind of gathering of younger Buddhists from the Triratna Sangha. And we just thought, not everybody knew each other. They're all from different parts of the country. So we were doing a puja in the shrine room, but in the middle, we invited everyone to come up to the front, and instead of just making a little bow to the shrine, we invited them to turn to the whole audience, all these people sitting there, and pick up a ritual object of their choice. And we had a choice of picking up a sword, which happened to be in the dressing up cupboard, a vajra, a kind of mythical Buddhist thunderbolt thing, a bell, and a flower. So picking up a ritual object, whichever one spoke to them, holding it aloft, and just announcing really loud and really clear to the whole assembly, my name is Lokabandhu, holding up the ritual object and saying, I practice in the world with whatever it was, love, or confidence, or clarity, or whatever. And it was kind of play, because all you were doing was saying, hello, my name is... But it had real power, because you know, people really wanted to practice in the world with whatever. And it kind of developed into, quite spontaneously, into kind of cheering. The more people came up and said, my name is whatever, I practice with love, people cheered. Fantastic. A wonderful wave of intention and affirmation, kind of back and forth between the audience. Another example, a bit more low-key, is I was recently on a retreat, Buddhafield retreat, and it was a walking retreat. So every day we walked 10 miles or so, set up a camp, and then slept, and then walked another 10 miles. We culminated at Avebury, and we did rituals all the way along. But what I particularly liked was we just had this etiquette for the whole walk. We weren't kind of ramblers, rambling along. We walked... we started every stage of the walk in a circle. We just gather in a circle and kind of look at each other, here we all are, and then bow to each other. You know, we are walking together. And then we walked in a straight line, like a kind of crocodile. Somebody at the front, somebody at the back. everyone walking in silence, quite mindfully, like a long walking meditation. And then we'd finish again in a circle. So we'd begin in a circle, walk and finish in a circle. And it just had a lovely simplicity to it, that we knew exactly what we were doing. Now we're starting, now we're walking, now we're finishing, you know, honouring each other each time as we went along. So, I'll just say one more thing about play, because it is both real and not real, and it's quite hard to kind of hold those two in mind at once. And this image above our heads, the thousand-armed Avalokiteshvara, particularly speaks to me, because when I got ordained, I took up the meditation of the thousand-armed Avalokiteshvara. And every one of these Buddhas has a meditation associated with it. And they're all slightly different. So this one, you begin by visualizing the figure, which is quite complicated, but that's what you do. And this one, after a while, halfway through, you suddenly kind of flipped the meditation and became the figure. So for 5 years, on more or less daily basis, I was visualizing myself becoming this extraordinarily 11-headed, thousand-armed figure, and sort of standing there, you know, radiating out beneficial action to the universe. And you do that, and then you kind of flip it again, and you're kind of back to normal. And then you dissolve the whole thing, and the ritual space ends, and you get up and have breakfast. But it is just that mood of knowing perfectly well you're not really got 1,000 arms or anything, and yet wholeheartedly imagining that you do. That's what kids do when they play. They sort of know they're not going to the moon, but they really imagine that they are, and it really works. It's part of development, part of growing up. So, I want to start summing up now. I could tell more and more stories about rituals, but I won't. I just want to kind of end with a few kind of tips for how to create a ritual. So first of all, just to remind us, rituals come in all shapes and sizes, individual and collective, traditional and improvised. Hopefully, non-deluded rather than deluded. Non-deluded meaning just in harmony with the general law of cause and effect. There really can be an effect from what you're doing, and it can be linked to the effect you want. A good ritual really engages your depths, and it finds ways to do that by speaking to you on so many levels, poetic and imaginative and so on. And they can either help us just mark what is happening, a rite of passage, or help us to set our intentions for the future. Two different sorts of ritual, I think. And if it's collective, it really helps us bind a whole community together. So how you do this takes us a bit back into the realm of almost being a theatre director, but not at all, you know, constructing a performance. Or if it's a performance, then it's got to be a performance everyone is part of. So the first thing, just get really, really clear about your purpose. What are you setting out to do? Also, I suppose, clear about the appropriateness of that purpose for the people. Then, communicate that. Ideally, everyone would know exactly what they're doing and why. There's no room for kind of mumbo-jumbo rituals, like burning giant upside-down triangles. I'm sure the monks knew in India what they were doing, but I didn't know. I mean, we weren't meant to be watching, so... But anyway, communicating the purpose. Then, it boils down to thinking it through really, really carefully. What exactly are the details of this whole thing? And all the details just have to serve the purpose. So you really can be in this kind of ritual space and everything flows. And if you're doing it and interruptions happen, that can't be helped, but the preparation is just trying to get everything right. So the people know what they're doing, the props, you know, all to hand. When we did this ritual in Birmingham, we had a sword and we had a bell and we had a vajra. And just think it all through in great detail, including the words. So it's a kind of performance, but everybody part of it. Then be really clear when you are in ritual space and when you're not. Because ritual space is something quite special, and a good ritual will have it and be really clear that is it. And then the last thing really is kind of holds this double attitude of total wholeheartedness and total play. Again, like children, if you're not sure what to do, watch children, I think. Be completely wholehearted. This is a ritual, this really matters, we really are evoking certain images, but also kind of let it just kind of play. Then close the ritual space, just as important as opening it. Then just take time to absorb what has happened. You don't want to jump up and rush off and do something completely different. Just take time. And then the last thing I wrote down was repeat as needed. Because I think rituals do tend to grow in power if they are repeated. Particularly if it's a community. Just because everyone comes together and just knows what they're doing. And you can really kind of all be part of it more and more and more. So repeat as needed. And it could be just a few times, or it could be like every day for the rest of your life. There's nothing wrong with a ritual where that happens. So I was going to look what the next Buddhafield ritual is. For you, the next invitation to participate in something. I think it's a kind of whole singing, chanting ritual tonight, but I can't swear to that. You'd have to look on the...
It is, yeah.
It is?
Got two, yes. The Bodhisattva in the meditation space and a
okay.
doing one.
Here.
Singing.
So here is a kind of whole singing, chanting mantra workshop. And over in the meditation space is evoking the energy of Vajrasattva. Vajrasattva is this completely different Buddha, white, kind of purity and power, I suppose. Purity and power, yeah. So I invite you to participate in them. But ritual isn't everyone's cup of tea. But I sort of feel, I don't feel this about tea at all, but I feel with ritual, there is something really powerful there and really kind of nourishing there. So if this talk has helped you kind of connect with ritual, or at least understand ritual, I'd be really happy. I think the next thing to do is try it in the spirit of wholehearted play. So thank you very much.